They were gods of the stage in the 1980s, unstoppable forces with chart-topping hits, sold-out arenas, and larger-than-life personas. Phil Collins had the voice that defined a generation. Iggy Pop was the wild child who tore through punk rock like a storm, and David Lee Roth was the ultimate frontman, the face of excess and energy in Van Halen. But behind the lights, the fame, and the iconic music videos was a much darker story. Decades later, life hasn't been kind to these legends. From devastating health battles to heartbreak, loneliness, and fading spotlights, their journeys took turns no fan ever expected. These are the untold stories, the raw truths of what really happened after the music slowed down. A battered spotlight falls on a lone figure backstage. Sweat and grease paint streak his face, though he no longer jumps into crowds or lacerates himself on broken glass. Iggy Pop, the once ferocious punk godfather, stands in the hushed emptiness of a dressing room. The roar of distant applause is long gone. Only echoes of the past remain.
But, you got to start somewhere.
Oh, yeah, I mean, with the spiderwebs, was it a pleasant experience in any way?
No.
He is older now, stooped a little by age and scars. And as he looks into the mirror, the lines on his face shimmer with memories. He was born James Osterberg, Jr., on a stormy April night in 1947. In a trailer park outside Detroit. His father was a high school English teacher and baseball coach, tall and serious. His mother a nurse, gentle and soft-spoken. Their life was ordinary, Midwestern Sundays at church, backyard barbecues and school rules. But James was different. Even as a toddler, he resisted quiet. At 5 years old, he wasn't reading poems at breakfast, but hammering rubber pads into a slapstick beat. His parents, kind and bemused, indulged this odd child's passion. They gave him a proper drum kit, and in that cramped trailer, even yielded their own bedroom so he could play. By the time he reached high school, there was already a tension inside him, a restless current underneath the surface of this clean-cut boy. In the leafy streets of suburban Michigan, he found himself an outsider among affluent neighbors. He was scrawny, had freckles, and eyes that seemed to search for something invisible. While friends listened to Motown on the radio, he caught his first taste of American blues and garage rock. He started to dye his hair from brown to shock blonde, playing drums in teenage bands with names like the Iguanas and the Prime Movers. The Iguanas nicknamed him Iggy. It stuck, a sharper, wilder name than James Osterberg. Even then, he was bursting at the seams with more music than a humble trailer could contain. The 1960s rolled on like thunder in Detroit. Young James, now Iggy, was pulling at the threads of convention. He dropped out of college and moved to Chicago to chase the blues. But something else was forming. In 1967, back in Ann Arbor, he found his calling. Alongside guitarist Ron Ashton and two other misfits, he formed the Psychedelic Stooges. At first, the band called themselves Psychedelic, but soon dropped the word, letting their raw power speak for itself. The Stooges played anywhere, everywhere. Church basements, frat parties, abandoned warehouses. Iggy was up front, a feral howl from his lips, pounding drums abandoned for a microphone. As the late 60s counterculture swirled around them, the Stooges stood apart. Their music was primitive and menacing, a grinding collision of blues riffs and punk attitude before punk existed. While their peers chased pretty melodies and summer of love slogans, the Stooges were painting with a darker palette. At gigs, Iggy would bare himself, sometimes literally, bruising his chest with a microphone, gasping like an animal in pain, dipping his body into the audience like a wounded fish thrashing on land. Fans would clutch him, fearing and exhilarated. The lines between singer and crowd blurred in a whirlwind of sweat and stage blood. They recorded their first album in 1969. It sold a handful of copies, too unpolished for a commercial world that wanted gloss. They toured relentlessly. Detroit became their breeding ground. A new album, Fun House, in 1970, barely registered on the charts, but it was pure thunder. The band's reputation spread as wild and unpredictable. Then Raw Power in 1973, produced by rock visionaire David Bowie, brought Iggy's raw voice and shuddering guitar riffs to more ears. In those years, he sang verses like a prophecy of his own life. "I'm a street-walking cheetah with a heart full of napalm. I am the world's forgotten boy." It was as if he knew even then how lonely the path would be. But success never arrived in the way they dreamed. Each album sold just enough to keep the lights on, but not to lift them onto triumphant charts. The mainstream turned up its nose. Detroit's finest was still a backyard act to them. Disappointments piled up. The band's internal bonds frayed as hallucinogens and misfits took hold. By 1974, the Stooges' fire was snuffed out. Their bassist sacked the frontman on tour, labeling his heroin habit a danger. The music stopped. The end of the Stooges marked the start of Iggy's personal abyss. He wrote songs for soundtracks, sometimes surprising himself by how well they fit a movie scene. A slowed-down guitar vamp he recorded became the background for paparazzi pictures in Train Spotting years after he made it. Occasionally, he'd find himself the unlikely hit of a commercial, a glimpse of mainstream recognition. Someone heard Lust for Life over an ad for a luxury car, and younger fans sniffed him out anew. He puzzled at it. Had Lust for Life really become a feel-good anthem? Through the 80s and 90s, music journalists occasionally called him never a has-been, always an icon. But Iggy knew the truth. Very little of this life had the sheen of the rock fantasies. He hated that phrase about being ahead of its time, even if it fit him. His gritty anthems about suburban malaise and inner turmoil were only really understood decades later. He told a music magazine in the 2000s that people listened to him because it's lonely out there. That loneliness, both his and his listeners, was his currency. As the 90s turned to the millennium, Iggy Pop found a kind of quiet resurgence. He was finally old enough that he could be celebrated without hurting the urchin punk fantasy. His name adorned festival posters. Teenagers tattooed Stooges lyrics on their arms. In 2003, he reformed the Stooges with surviving members and played sweaty punk revival shows around the world, finally thrilling the mainstream sort of approval he'd always flouted. In 2010, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But these honors felt bittersweet. The Stooges' original drummer, Scott Asheton, had died in 2014. Ron Asheton had already died in 2009. Some of the roaring young faces in the crowd were generations younger, seeing him as something between a relic and a hero. Meanwhile, Iggy himself was aging. He never wanted to be the tender, elder statesman of rock. He'd come from an era of reckless youth, and for a long time, fought to stay there. But by his late 70s, the party had finally hit back. His body creaked. By 2010, he joked about Carnegie Hall being the only place he'd want to end his stage-diving career, not because it was holy, but because he had broken so many bones doing it. In 2019, he admitted candidly, "My skeleton is the weak area," casually pulling out a cane backstage. He started to turn down tours and now relies on modest covers to keep the muscle memory alive rather than risking another fall. He once parried a stage jumper, flipping out his knee. Scars on his arms are dark reminders of glass he once flung into the crowd, of collars he broke. Even his once razor voice has weathered. It still rumbles, still tears through a song like Liquid Gravel. But in recent interviews, he's joked it sounds like Shrek after a Halloween party. His vision is imperfect, ruined by long nights of IV drugs. Some days he emerges from his Miami home late morning to dip into Biscayne Bay waters, his pool therapy, as he calls it, trying to soothe the wear of decades. He now wears a thick tan from the Florida sun. His face is bronzed like old metal. The photographer Ryan McGinley noted Iggy in his 70s could still appear like a classical bronze statuette, sinewy as a warrior and unforgiving as fate. In the twilight of this remarkable career, he is both venerated and misunderstood. Arena crowds chant his lyrics, but he remains defiantly alone with his music in the quiet. He lives with his wife, Nina Alu, a kind former flight attendant who tended to him through late tours and who he married in 2008. They keep pets, a parrot named Biggie among them, and he even made a radio show recommending songs to listeners. He has a spirit house near Miami, where he retreats to read old pulp novels and sketch dreamscapes. But much of his life is spent on the road, driving his vintage cars through night cities, as if chasing ghosts. In those moments back on stage, even in his 70s, he gives all that's left. With a mic in hand and cane set aside, he still arches his body into the crowd, a living metaphor for his life's trajectory. He throws himself into adoration but comes up empty-handed. His trademark maniacal grin never fully reaches his eyes anymore. There's a weary smile, yes, but shadow behind it. A memory of pain, defeat, and bewilderment. Iggy Pop's story is one of collision, the everyday boy against the gods of rock, the flesh against the fire of fame, the rebel crying out in the void. He never fit, even as others later worshipped the shape he took. His art was violent and vulnerable all at once. A blue-collar howl from one who felt powerless. A raw testament that sometimes the most potent rebellion is simply to bleed a little and stay alive. Tonight, as he finally steps away from the mirror and out toward the darkened venue, he carries his history etched into each bone. And even as an ovation waits somewhere beyond the curtain, he knows he remains, inevitably, inescapably, both worshipped and alone. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe with notifications on to never miss a video. He was born under dark omens. A tiny boy in West London, Phil Collins grew up in a home that would unravel. His father, a hard-working insurance man, died suddenly when Phil was still a boy, a heart attack in 1972. And just as those innocent years were slipping away, his mother began to fall apart, racked by illness. The household was torn. Young Phil became an impromptu guardian to his two older siblings. The fluttering dreams of childhood were shadowed by loss. He escaped into music. A toy drum kit given at age 5 was like breathing life into his soul. And acting. On stage, he found momentary refuge from the tumult at home. He even played the artful Dodger in Oliver, in London's West End as a child. But when the curtain fell, the loneliness returned. By puberty, he had already tasted a spotlight, yet backstage waited confusion and melancholy. Every cheerful note he struck on the drums was a desperate attempt to drown out an emptiness within. As a teenager, Phil became a born storyteller behind the drum kit. He joined the prog rock band Genesis in 1970 as a shy 19-year-old replacement drummer, arriving in a world far bigger than himself. The other boys in Genesis, Peter Gabriel, Mike Rutherford, Tony Banks, taught him the rhythms of the road. He learned to fuse heavy rock with wonder, pounding out complex time signatures under the crackling stage lights. On vinyl and on tour, he was a curious presence, often smiling, but watching the madness of fame with cautious eyes. He found a kind of family in the band, but his bandmates were wild romantic visionaries, distant when he most needed them. In Genesis shows, he kept the heartbeat of songs like Foxtrot and Selling England by the Pound alive, even as his own world showed cracks. Away from the stage, the hallways of his houses, the villas he shared with his growing fame, felt hollow. At the crest of the 1970s, he stood behind his drums in pulsing British arenas, but inside, he felt extraordinarily alone. When Peter Gabriel left Genesis in 1975, Phil Collins was suddenly yanked from the shadows and shoved into the limelight. The boy who once drummed behind Gabriel's flamboyant costumes now had the microphone thrust in front of him. The unexpected promotion left him dizzy with excitement and with terror. He became Genesis's lead singer practically overnight, inheriting the charisma that Gabriel had spent years building. The band's sound shifted too. Where Genesis had once been prog rock and theatrical, with Phil at the helm, they became tighter, punchier, wielding songs like Invisible Touch and Misunderstanding. On stage, Phil was electrifying, his quiet voice suddenly bellowing through massive PA systems, his intense eyes scanning the crowds. He banged on his drums with new fury, a glass-smashing drummer howling choruses to thousands in the dark. The success was intoxicating. He sang for sold-out stadiums. Genesis albums sold in the millions. But the mania of it all burned an ache in his chest. The kid who once acted in the wings now felt the impossibility of what he'd become. During quiet moments on tour buses and green rooms, he began to wonder what would happen when the drums finally fell silent. By the early 1980s, Phil Collins had transcended even Genesis. His solo career exploded from a wound of heartbreak. The title track of Face Value, 1981, his first album, leaked his pain when his first marriage collapsed. You could feel it in the air. He poured his anguish into every echoing drum fill and melodramatic lyric. The hit In the Air Tonight was raw and brooding, every beat a fist against the void. On stage, every song felt like a confession. Here, Phil Collins is caught in 1981, eyes closed, mouth open to let out a tortured cry. His youthful face is bathed in purple light, sweat traces paths down his temples. At that moment, he is invincible to the crowd, yet inside he is barely holding on. Fame had become a double-edged sword. By day, he was adored worldwide. By night, he drank himself to sleep to make the loneliness stop. Albums like Against All Odds and Susudio climbed the charts, making Phil a global phenomenon. Millions recognized his voice, a smooth British croon with a slight gruffness, and they adored the upbeat pop sound of Genesis's latest hits. The Grammys piled up, an Oscar followed for a Disney love song, and MTV cemented him as an 80s icon. Everywhere he went, people cheered and held up album covers. In those golden years, his face graced magazine covers and television, projecting brightness and warmth. Yet behind that megawatt grin, Phil's heart was crumbling. He was pulling of rock star poses, but his grip on life was slipping. The camera loved him. The silence at home questioned him. Fame's price was steep. His first wife, Andrea, had given him a son and an adopted daughter, Simon and Jolie, and then walked away after 5 years of marriage. The divorce left scars deeper than any drum solo. Soon after, Lily was born to his second wife, Jill, and Phil convinced himself this would be different, that this time he would be whole. Phil Collins gave what he called his last performance, singing seated on a stool, looking out at fans who had grown up with his music, but never saw him stand behind a kit again. The silence after the drums was deafening. Phil had spent almost every minute of his life hit by music, yet when the rhythm stopped, he still felt empty. He told interviewers it was like someone pulled the plug. "I've spent all my life playing drums," he sighed in a recent documentary. "To suddenly not be able to do that, it's a shock." The drums were his identity, and with them silenced he didn't know who he was. He even confided that occasionally he fantasized about writing himself out of this story. He pictured a scene where Phil Collins simply vanishes, and all people say is, "Oh, what a shame," then carry on. In the darkest times, he admitted he considered ending it, a quiet overdose in an antiseptic hotel rather than a burst of violence. But always, the thought of his children stopped him. "I wouldn't do that to my children," he said, his voice flat. So he continued on, each day surviving a little at a time, watching old videos of himself playing drums at frenetic speeds. He saw how young he was, how much energy once coursed through him, and he ached with loss. Away from the stage lights, his relationships frayed. His youngest sons played on football fields and drum kits of their own. Nicholas tours with Genesis as a drummer in his place. But they grew up largely on another continent. His daughter Lily, now a movie star, had memories of her father as half legend, half mystery. He later wrote in his memoir that their divorce had left her life hollow. The once pop star dad seemed a stranger with a heavy wallet, but distant ways. There were stories, maybe true, maybe rumor, of invitations unnoticed or support he never gave, of daughter weddings he didn't attend. "Dad has a different life," Lily recalled in an interview, eyes glistening. "I can't relate to him." That cut deeper than bankruptcy. Each missed holiday, each empty seat at the table, chipped away at whatever remained of the family bonds. On nights when the audience has left, and only the ghosts of cymbals remain, Phil Collins is alone with his ghosts. In recent interviews, he has often spoken in a whisper, looking weary. He admitted he's been very sick, that he woke up with no hunger to play music anymore. Sometimes he just lies in bed, watching shadows on the Swiss wall, wondering how the mighty have fallen. The boy who once dreamed in color now dreams in gray. He has said he feels as if his air miles have all flown out, that he used up everything that life gave him. The stage identity that once defined him is lost. The cheeky smile in videos and the staccato laughter between songs have faded. Now there's just a quiet man carrying the echo of a great drum beat in his soul. In the end, the legacy of Phil Collins is tangled with heartbreak. The songs he gave to the world, some of its sweetest ballads and most famous pop hooks, are sung by others to this day. But he paid dearly for every note. Here is a rock star who could move arenas, a master of rhythm who could literally no longer stand, let alone drum. His voice, once strong and defiant, now cracks with fragility. Still, in a haze of sorrow and gratitude, he clings to the applause in his mind. He knows he left a mark on music, but he will always feel hollow under it. The legend's last drum beat fades into silence, and Phil Collins, the man behind it, is left whispering in the dark. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe with notifications on to never miss a video. Under the blaze of arena lights and amid the roar of thousands, David Lee Roth once bounded and spun like a human whirlwind, the embodiment of 1980s rock and roll excess. Clad in spandex and platform boots, microphone in hand, he was Van Halen's giddy ringmaster, cracking wise one moment and soaring into high splits the next. But behind the acrobatics and showmanship lay a life scarred by hardship and solitude. This is the story of a boy who fought polio and braces to become rock's ultimate frontman, and of the man left feeling hollow after the spotlight dimmed. In every triumph and tumble, the saga of Diamond Dave is as electric and tumultuous as any guitar riff he ever belted out. David Lee Roth was born in 1954 in Bloomington, Indiana, the eldest of 3 children in a Jewish family. His father was a respected physician and his mother a teacher, but young Dave's life was anything but ordinary. As a toddler, he fell ill with polio and spent part of his childhood wearing leg braces. Doctors predicted he might never run normally, but once those braces came off, Roth took off running, both literally and metaphorically, faster than anyone expected. Classmates remembered a boy who was restless, even wild, constantly in monkey time, dashing through the halls. His parents even sent him to a ranch for troubled teens to instill discipline. Still, Dave seemed wired differently. He was hyperactive, creatively bright, and undeterred by the early struggles with health and attention. By high school, the braces were gone, but the spirit they had forged remained. Roth channeled his restless energy into music and performance. Inspired by old Hollywood showmen like Al Jolson and the raw soul of Ray Charles, he became infatuated with the idea of entertaining people. In his late teens, Roth's family moved to Pasadena, California, and he briefly attended Pasadena City College. One fateful day, he crossed paths with 2 brothers from a band called Mammoth, guitarist Eddie Van Halen and drummer Alex Van Halen. Intrigued by the brothers' fretboard wizardry, Roth offered to sing for them. The name Mammoth didn't stick, and Roth himself suggested the fresh new moniker Van Halen, reasoning it had the punch and mystique of a Santana. By 1974, the quartet was together, rounding out its lineup with bassist Michael Anthony. They cut their teeth playing dingy clubs along the Sunset Strip and across Southern California, sometimes earning only $120 a night and spending it on banana split feasts at midnight diners. One legendary night, a cop interrupted a boisterous Denny's banquet, and Roth quipped, "Sir, we're a rock and roll band," as if that explained everything. The brash humor and bravado in that exchange typified the band's early years, hungry, cocky, and electrified by raw energy. When Van Halen finally broke through in 1978, it was with a self-titled album that exploded out of the speakers. Roth's voice, a brassy, primal howl punctuated with gleeful whoops, was the perfect foil for Eddie's revolutionary guitar heroics. In concert, Dave became a scene stealer. He pranced across the stage, spun in circles with arms outstretched, and launched into mid-air somersaults. With each high kick, so high he often kicked drum kits over, and each mock striptease into night vision goggles, he transformed rock shows into spectacle. Critics likened his act to vaudeville meets Sunset Strip. Audiences ate it up. By the late 70s and early 80s, Van Halen was selling out ever larger venues. Roth openly reveled in the band's hedonistic reputation. He once joked that Van Halen made Led Zeppelin look like Boy Scouts, a testament to the band's non-stop parade of booze, groupies, and clowning around backstage. In interviews, he was irreverent and larger than life, often masking a sharp intelligence with a jokester's mask. He even co-directed the band's early videos, like the cheeky Hot for Teacher, turning them into MTV hits. In those years, Roth seemed unstoppable, the poster child of MTV-era hard rock, and the living embodiment of rock excess. But any rocket climb can be followed by a crash. By the mid-1980s, cracks were forming within Van Halen's glossy walls. Inside the studio, a creative schism had grown between Roth and Eddie Van Halen. Eddie had become fascinated with synths and new wave textures, a direction Dave accused of morose detours from their guitar-driven roots. When Roth released a Surf and Standards EP, Crazy from the Heat, in early 1985, it hinted at his restlessness. He was already trying on new hats. Behind the scenes, those who spent time with Roth sensed cracks beneath the swagger. Guitarist Jason Becker, who played with Roth in the 1991-92 touring band, later recalled Roth appearing deeply downcast on the road, a worn man desperate to entertain, despite feeling depressed. He sat through parts of shows. Roth went through the motions of rock stardom, releasing albums, touring moderately successful legs, but he also chased ever newer escapes. A brief stint filling in for Howard Stern on satellite radio in 2005 ended abruptly when he simply didn't retain Stern's audience. In lounge acts in Las Vegas, he tried to recapture glory but was panned as old news. It all hinted at a restless soul who couldn't stop performing, yet no longer felt the same jubilant certainty as in his youth. Through triumph and ruin, Roth's personal struggles were always somewhat shrouded from the public eye. He never married, and teased that he'd slept with every pretty girl with two legs during Van Halen's heyday, a jab hinting at a playboy lifestyle that was perhaps more brash myth than romantic reality. He sidestepped questions about family and love, admitting only in jest that he had loved deeply but valued privacy in counting the cost of those experiences. Physically, the years of high kicks and flips began to show. By the 2010s, he was performing with a cane at times, moving more gingerly when not on stage. Fans speculated he also battled diabetes and chronic knee pain, though Roth rarely addressed health questions directly. Emotionally, some felt he became more guarded with age, the wisecracking frontman interspersed with cynical asides when asked about his peers. In interviews after Eddie's passing, he lamented that the youthful recklessness of the band was gone, replaced by men who could no longer climb Treasure Mountain together as they once did. As he's aged, the rock world's view of Roth has only grown complicated. To some younger fans, he is a cheeky relic, the once mighty showman in Velcro pants, still sharp-tongued, still swinging between genial chat and sudden profanity. To die-hard devotees of 80s rock, he remains a living legend, a colorfully reckless hero who practically invented what it meant to be a rock frontman on MTV. His influence is undeniable. Countless glam metal bands and pop rock frontmen cite Diamond Dave as inspiration. He made it cool for hair metal bands to smile, writhe, and flirt with the audience as much as sing to them. Yet others note the loneliness that seemed to eventually creep into Roth's world, a performer still seeking a fix of adrenaline amid a fading spotlight. In later interviews, he's alternated between mournful nostalgia for Van Halen's golden era and defiant pride in his own path. "Stay frosty," he tells fans, an old catchphrase as much a salute as a rallying cry. Today, Roth's legacy is a mix of shattering highs and poignant lows. He reshaped rock concerts into drama fests, bringing candy-colored showmanship to what had been a rough-edged art. He wrote some of the era's most anthemic songs, wrote even more irreverent lyrics, and recorded albums that still blast through classic rock radio. Yet his career also stands as a tale of incomplete promises, a superstar who walked away at his peak, only to spend years chasing fragmented comebacks. Through it all, he retained an imperious, sometimes perplexing faith in himself, even as critics called him egotistical or anachronistic. As of the early 2000s and 20s, in the quiet between tours, he appears on social media now and then with sunglasses and a grin, reminding everyone that under the crystal lights, he was and is still himself. In the end, David Lee Roth is a paradox, a man whose life seems tragic not because of final ruin, but because behind every screaming crowd was a restless spirit who rarely found peace away from the stage. And yet, that restless spirit is what made him roar so brilliantly while he did. In the final accounting, Roth remains a symbol of rock's wild side, scarred but still shining. He gave the world high kicks and wild laughs, and now, in his twilight years, he stands before us, cane in hand, every bit the showman, a figure who knew he could never walk quietly into the night. In the annals of rock history, David Lee Roth will be remembered as much for his inimitable swagger as for the private battles he battled out of view. For better or worse, the boy from Indiana who put on leg braces after polio became a man who danced out his destiny. And when he finally flipped off the stage forever, he did it on his own terms, emblematic of a life lived loud and broad as any rock song ever written. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe with notifications on to never miss a video.